welcome to the show, Tom Snyder. So Tom, executive director, connector, genius at many things, currently with Riot. Welcome, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and give us your 5 or more minute bio.
Thanks, Nick. Good to be here. Tom Snyder. I lead the Riot organization. As you said, we're an economic development focused nonprofit with the basic thesis that the good jobs are all the jobs that get created at the forefront of new technology. So get to spend a lot of time working in the technology space, helping entrepreneurs, helping established organizations to figure out how do I continue to capture new market opportunities that I wasn't able to capture before we had really interesting interconnected devices and data analytics and all the buzzwords that you have in the tech space today.
Yep. So Riot is built on IoT, and why don't you give us like a 30-second or more? I'm not trying to put time limits on this. I'm a terrible host. Give us the IoT for Dummies overview.
So for those that don't know the acronym, the IoT is the Internet of Things, and it's this concept of all of our devices being connected to each other and sharing data and just automating lots of stuff. If you didn't know about IoT, don't worry too much about it. I think it's a transient term, to be honest. It's kind of like the World Wide Web. Once upon a time, everything was World Wide Web, and now we don't use that word anymore. We talk about the internet. The Internet of Things is really about the whole world is moving to being data driven in real time. So more and more we're using the term the data economy. But the Raleigh Internet of Things meetup was the start of Riot. That's where we got our name. And so we still have this love of the IoT term.
Yep. Sweet. Well, that's a great actual kind of, I wouldn't call it a transition, but, or the way I think of IoT is data, but it's also that data is coming off of more and more things that are deployed into the field. Where did we get our data from, 10 years ago?
Well, 10 years ago or even more, we didn't think so much about data. We thought more about information, which was, we gathered stuff, but we had to put a little bit of sense behind what that was. And then that ends up looking like a document, or it's a photo, but you know what the photo is. Where the Internet of Things is fundamentally different from data, say 10 or 15 years ago, is that now we're able to do things the instant that a piece of data is created. We can, instantaneously analyze it, understand what it means, create some kind of action, drive, automation as I described. And a lot of that is, with the human outside the loop. We're getting to a point where the cars can drive themselves. Doesn't mean that we don't still like the ability maybe to occasionally take the steering wheel and drive it ourselves. But, when things can be automated and we can then live, happier, higher quality lives because of that automation, kind of that's where the data is going. But you made a really interesting point that it's hard to automate an awful lot of things if you don't have information from everywhere in real time. And historically, we just weren't able to collect and automate that data, even the data collection piece, because it was too expensive to deploy sensors in different places, or we didn't have the radio technologies to get the data off the sensor and back to the cloud, or it was too expensive to analyze that data. The cool thing that's happening now is that the cost of data transmission, the cost of data analytics, the cost of data storage, the cost of sensor deployment, the ability to harvest energy from our environment so these sensors can power themselves and you don't have a bunch of batteries that are dying everywhere. Like all of these things are technology advances that are tipping and approaching cost of zero. And so, we're entering a new age and an opportunity for a fundamental transformation of the economy because of technologies that are democratized through low cost.
Okay, that's great. I love this sort of evolution from IoT, and we're focusing on Internet and things, like what are all these things to data, and so what you just said was something that I have had a question about, which is a lot of IoT, well, now I'll call them data projects, have sort of a captured closed loop end-to-end use case or installation. You have to buy the sensors, you have to buy a gateway, you have to buy a layer of software or build this all yourself. And then you have to go install it each time you want to do it. So it's kind of like, while it's repeatable, it's sort of a non-repeatable one-off like installation process. As you say, these things are like kind of out there. There's going to be more things, more sensors, more data, and the cost of these things are going to zero. It's infrastructure. Give us sort of like a relative to 0 to 100%. I mean, how much data is out there and kind of in an infrastructure layer, which is maybe readily available to all or to many versus still kind of like one-off, closed loop systems?
It's a great question. And I don't know if we know yet how the dust is going to settle on this. There are lots of reasons to make data sets completely open and accessible to everybody. And there's a huge shift in government, for example, towards open data and getting away from proprietary systems and things. However, the availability of information, this is fundamentally why in oil and gas, the biggest of the big players in the energy sector never gave up drilling, because whoever can get the oil at the very beginning owns the entire downstream value chain and how that oil is refined and transferred and everything else. Well, data is the same way. Whoever owns the sensor ultimately can decide at that point who gets that sensor information. Do they keep that sensor data to themselves, or do they share it with others? You see, like in IBM, for example, recognizing years ago the importance of weather data. And so they bought the weather company to own all those edge weather stations that are collecting information, because weather affects almost every business. You see big software companies like Amazon and Google and others building hardware. Why does Google care about a smoke alarm, or why does Amazon want a doorbell? Well, it's because those are the devices that are generating the data that they can then use to build services and things. One day, the auto manufacturers are going to figure this out, and they're going to stop. They won't let Uber or Lyft know where the cars are, and they'll be the ride-sharing companies. Right now, those ride-sharing companies don't know where the cars are anyway. They just know where a driver's phone is. But when a car drives itself, the phone's out of the loop and the data has been cut off. So you're right. It's going to be interesting to see how many important data sets become proprietary and owned by big corporations, and how many are open and accessible for anyone to use. The jury's still out.
That's great. That's crazy. I wonder if IBM will now just be a weather company. I mean, they seem to have shed like the services. I think they're selling the healthcare, the Watson. Like, which one in that big thing is going to be kind of the one that lasts? It could be weather. Ironic.
I think what's interesting about that, Nick, though, is that companies have to realize technology is the single biggest steerer of the economy. We can think regulation from government and other things. There are things that steer our economy, but nothing steers it as fundamentally as advancing technology. And companies that don't adapt to do new things fail. And IBM is one of these long-standing companies that has realized it needs to reinvent itself over and over again. And so, yeah, maybe it'll be a weather company, but it won't be that weather company forever, because there'll be another advance in technology that'll steer them in a new direction. I think that the manufacturing sector is a great example here, where for years manufacturing has focused on technology adoption only for doing lower cost manufacturing. And if all you're doing is fighting on cost, you have a losing proposition. And so manufacturing got moved to other countries where there's lower cost labor and other things. But now that the sensors are going to be added to the things manufacturers are making, manufacturers now can completely flip the tables and say, hey, we're back in control, because we have the infrastructure to do something that's really hard, to build things and to distribute them and so on. And we now own all the data that those things generate. All of a sudden, manufacturing could jump back to the top of the heap. The question is, anybody going to figure that out and actually do that?
That's right. Well, one thing that you said, which I think is interesting. So I was thinking, like, is this like open source versus closed source or proprietary data? And businesses can have proprietary data. Like it's sort of like maybe not, well, I mean, this is a different thing, but it's not necessarily the business's job to determine what's proprietary versus not. Of course, they want proprietary stuff. They want to have their own data, et cetera, but it's really in the government. So like, and I notice you guys, or I not notice, I know that you guys work with sort of municipalities. How much of this is a government role, which is sort of, I mean, in a free market capitalism world, and we're saying like, gosh, more of this should be the government. Sounds weird, sounds crazy, but I will also just throw in for storytelling or context. I was just watching Bill's Brain about Bill Gates, and the whole first episode is about him solving these septic system issues. And so he's like, all these, everyone cares about like water and this and that, in the developing nations, but he's like, there's no septic systems. They never invested. And now in today's dollars, it would be billions and billions of dollars like per city. So completely out of reach to reinstall that valuable infrastructure that for us is like, prevents, what are like $3 million baby deaths a year. So like we did do that infrastructure and now we are able to thrive. I mean, there's one of many infrastructures, obviously kind of in a developing kind of place like us versus the developing nation. But thinking about that, is that something that, you're kind of advocating with governments to be thinking about?
There's one area in particular that it is adamant, I think, that the government do more, which is the deployment of broadband to every resident, every citizen, everyone that lives in any geography. For years, we have recognized the importance of water systems, of electric grids, of things that are highly regulated. Now, just because it's highly regulated doesn't mean there's not private operators, right? My power company is a private company. It's not a municipal utility, but other towns in North Carolina are municipal or around the nation. But there was this decision for whatever reason. The reason was money, but we'll not get too political in this conversation. That broadband is really only provided by private industry. In North Carolina, in fact, it is illegal since 2011 for a municipal government to provide broadband to its citizens. It must be provided by private industry. But the deployment of broadband is not necessarily just a free market. It costs a lot more to deploy infrastructure in the mountains, for example, than it is in somewhere else. It's more expensive per customer in a rural area than an urban area. The cost of deployment of that infrastructure is so expensive that standard free market principles don't necessarily apply. And therefore, the competition that would enable a fully privatized solution is just not really there when you think of broadband as the cost to deploy versus the cost of services. But if you think about broadband as the cost to deploy versus the societal value, there's a huge value proposition to provide broadband to every resident. And therefore, that's where I think the government should step in and make sure that we are, enabling everyone to access in remote education, in remote healthcare, telehealth, in e-commerce, in remote work. If we look at that particular thing not as a utility, we're failing. And I think that's where the US is falling behind other nations and not thinking that way. So I think there is a role for government there. I don't necessarily think that there's a strong role for government to be adamant about this data set should be open, this data set should be proprietary. I think, there are probably some exceptions, but for the most part, the market can solve some of those things. The second area where government maybe does need to take a stronger role is in protecting user data. Privacy is very much a business decision, and right now there's an awful lot of bad actors out there that are not holding people's privacy with as high regard as they probably should. And I think that we'll see the US follow Europe and some other global leaders in strengthening privacy laws.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I mean, the US or the government, at least, I guess if they thought like a business, it sounds like they have a lot more money and upside to make by making the investment in broadband, whereas a private company only gets the rents or the service fees or the contracts or whatever, or maintenance money. The municipality gets, that plus, increase in economic development, increase in transactions, possibly reduction in healthcare costs and other things that are burdens on the system. So they kind of like their revenue goes up and their kind of cost basis across the board could go down. So that's definitely a compelling argument. What about like the sensor infrastructure? Where does that fall into with the broadband? You don't think that's maybe a government thing if they want to provide more sort of data collectors that will then become open data?
I think when the government does sensing directly, that more often than not, that data will be accessible as open source information, or there'll be public APIs for people to subscribe to those data sets. I'm seeing evidence more and more where when the government works with private industry to deploy a new smart city solution, for instance, that there is a requirement on that private industry provider to allow the data then to be accessible for public use. So I think we will see more of that happen actually. From the pure private side, one of the things that's interesting is we're seeing more and more when an industry is coming to provide a solution, say to an enterprise customer. Oftentimes when they're deploying sensors, they're going ahead and deploying those sensors with their own network and bringing everything back through, a 4G gateway for data backhaul or something, because then it's absolutely their system, it's their data. They're never connecting to the client's local IT system or their local Wi-Fi. It greatly simplifies deployment, and so we're seeing a lot of that. I don't know how sustainable that is. If you're running say a large high rise and you have 25 different service providers providing 25 different services over 25 independent networks, things could get messy over time. But right now that's definitely a trend that we're seeing, because you can deploy a solution without having to deal with a client's IT, and that is reduces a lot of friction in getting things off the ground.
If you're a high rise, what could you start I mean, I feel like there's a couple opportunities there. One is, could you start deploying infrastructure that stubs out to, innovation partners if you're a high rise building? I guess what are your thoughts? The other, I guess, is sort of a totally different tangent, but I was going to talk about blockchain, and it's almost like how could we create incentives for businesses to deploy more stuff? They can keep it proprietary, but they could also then tokenize the data and offer it to, multiple uses. It might not allow for like direct competitive uses, but it's why, if they could take it and say, hey, actually this is available to the right types, and we can execute a transaction, they can now monetize their data more so, and therefore justify more kind of deployments and again, more kind of innovation. What are your thoughts on those two?
I don't think there's any question that what you're describing is going to happen. People are going to realize this data has value. In some cases, it'll be good just to offer it open source and free to the community because of the value it creates, to the businesses around the high rise, for example, or whatever. But there also may be a little bit the way intellectual property is. You own a patent, and then you might license the patent to one entity for one field of use and another entity for another field of use. I think we'll see the same kinds of things happen in the data space, and through things like blockchain. That's a way to kind of manage those systems.
So we could kind of keep going on this. I do think there's, I'm really interested in, I don't even know if it's really the democratization or the decentralization. I don't know if it really fits the right buzzword, but like more of the, like, if there's more abilities, like you said, for this inevitability of unlocking value streams for people to invest more into data infrastructures, to like make the investments. We want there to be sort of like commercially viable reasons to invest. Is there any one of those things that are taking the lead? And I want to go to like, what are some opportunities for companies, whether it's a big company, like how might they invest? But like, yeah, are there any of these sort of like methods? I also don't want to say protocol because that sounds too blockchainy, but are there any of these methods where people are seeing a more innovative approach business model wise that are like to justify more deployments, more capital investment? What are you kind of seeing on trend?
Well, so related to that, maybe tying that thread together with my little soapbox I just gave on broadband, you look at a community like Wilson, North Carolina, that started deploying broadband to their citizens before this law in 2011 took place in North Carolina. That's a rural community, originally tobacco town, that year over year saw declining tax revenues, saw declining population. They deployed broadband. Now they've reversed that. It's a growing community. There's construction cranes, there's reinvestment in downtown, there's new businesses coming in. Well, as part of not just deploying the broadband utility, then they bring in smart metering and they bring in other things that start generating data. Well, any company that's interested in working in the energy space, that's working in a place where they might be able to get access to utility data for something that's different than just the delivery of the energy services that the utility does, well, you want to go to that place. So governments that start thinking about having more and more data that's available for anyone to use, of course, businesses are going to say that's an area that I might want to work. That's an area where I can advance my company, where I can advance my business. So I think it's as simple as equating data to another resource. People do business where there's the most resources. And historically, resources have been things like universities that are churning out talent, and resources are obviously, low cost utilities, water, electric, land, so on. More and more, that resource that's necessary for business is going to be data. So those places that have the most data available have a leg up on those that don't.
Yep, that's very interesting. If this was like someone that we both want to come into our ecosystems, right? So it's a company or someone has funding for innovation and is looking for opportunities. Are there places that you point them, or are there sort of trends that you're like, hey, for the private capital, we've got more businesses that aren't in necessarily data or IoT or sort of like they aren't in this type of business. But many might be asking themselves, so actually maybe that's a better way to take it. Like if you're saying I'm a business and I feel tangentially related to this and I'm not already thinking about opportunities, what should they start thinking about?
So here's my thesis. I'm going to try and describe a Venn diagram, which might be tough on an audio program, right? But if you think about three important circles,
I'll air draw it while you do that too. So
yeah, I'm holding my hands up in a big circle here. So so one circle is market needs. And, a business is not successful if you're not addressing a market need. So that's basic business 101. Then you've got emerging technology, because I've already made the statement that I believe new business and new jobs and everything happen where technology is driving. And then there's, what does my organization already have? What are my assets? My talent pool, the things that I'm already good at. When you look at the intersection of what does the market need and what am I already good at, and how can I use new technology in new ways to deliver value, that's where future high margin revenue sits at that intersection. It's hard to believe that very many organizations are ready to bring in those new technologies with your existing talent. You need to usually partner and learn. So the places, back to your question, the places that tend to be the most successful at driving innovative, new, high margin business, high margin companies are the ones that have the different partners that you can bring in, which all kind of is founded on diversity. What's interesting about North Carolina, where I live, is that we are not dominated by one market sector. We're not all pharma or life science. We're not all oil and gas. We're not all medical devices. There are places around our country that are much more just single industry places. North Carolina and Research Triangle have a lot of diversity in that regard, have a lot of diversity in terms of where people have come from. This is a state where there's been a lot of immigration that's happened from New York, and immigration that's happened from California and other places. When you have places that draw a lot of diversity, you then can find the partners that you need to bring the right expertise to develop whatever that new opportunity is. And so I think that's a critical asset for where to look to do businesses. Where do you have those resources like Smashing Boxes, for instance, that can help you to get these IoT products off the ground?
Yeah. And what about the like data piece of that Venn diagram, right? Because what we have, what's a need and what we're good at and what we enjoy, or it's the love and passion in there. But how, because I think this is it feels like not enough IoT projects or data projects are unleashed on the world in different scales. It seems like they should just be flying everywhere. Everyone should have some sort of idea, not everyone, but relatively, like many more should have ideas for how data is going to play a role in their business. It's going to transform the economy. It's going to transform lots of things. Before they go out and say, is it just to say, I need data, I need to find a partner because I know what needs are that are in my kind of ecosystem, and I know what I'm good at? Or is there sort of like that first initial 2 or 3 questions that should be asked internally before that, which then sets them down the path of finding kind of partners or ecosystem kind of like thinkers on their behalf?
I think that the first question always has to be, what problem am I solving? And then ask a whole lot of questions around making sure that actually is a market-driven problem. So it's really actually not that much about the data or the technology. It's business is still basically solving customer needs and pain points that are so strong somebody will pay money for whatever the solution is. But then I think a little bit more to your question about how do you find those partners and data. We've talked a lot about data. The data itself is not necessarily that valuable unless, as we were talking earlier, you have information somebody else needs, and you could sell that data just for the value of it. But really, the value comes out of analytics. And anything that you see where companies right now are talking about machine learning, they're talking about AI, they're talking about neural nets, deep learning, all these kinds of things. This is all about taking that data and turning it into actionable intelligence, if you will. So when you are putting together the total solution stack to address a market need, it's important to recognize I need to know where is that source data coming from and who do I need to partner with to get that? And then what am I going to do to analyze that data and understand the meaning from it? And then what actions am I going to take to deploy the result back to my customers? And then you have to overlay that with the right cybersecurity partnerships to protect the information and with the right business practices to protect the privacy of the data. And so there's in a total solution stack, there's a lot of important elements. And where do you find the organizations that'll put that together? It's groups like Riot. You can reach out to us at riot.org, of course. We're a nonprofit focused on helping those to connect. But you find these partnerships at co-working spaces. You find the partnerships with established engineering and software consultancies in a region, because organizations like that know their swim lane. They know that what they're really good at developing and helping to build out as a product for you, but they also know their limits, and therefore any good consultancy knows the three other partners that you bring in that have the other three expertises that you might need on a project. So those are some starting points that I would recommend.
So let's switch gears to Riot. And I guess, I know there's always something cool going on, but do you want to highlight a couple of things that you got going on that are coming up fairly timely and let us know about a couple of those.
Yeah, so maybe one at the macro level is that we're in a growth mode right now. We're operating in a couple of cities in North Carolina. We're expanding up into the Northern Virginia area, the DC Richmond corridor. So any of the listeners that are in that area, we'd love to connect. And we're also have started hiring out in Colorado, and most of these expansions are around our Ride Accelerator program. So we run an equity-free startup accelerator, helping companies to grow. We have worked with companies that have raised over $400 million, created hundreds and hundreds of jobs. We're really proud about that. So applications are open right now for our next cohort of the Ride Accelerator program. Go to ride.org and sign up. Of nearer term interest, though, we just announced a partnership with Facebook Reality Labs and US Ignite and Google Fiber and a few other partners to run an augmented reality challenge. On March 8th, I believe it is, we are going to have a virtual kind of kickoff event that anyone can join. It's free to attend, where we'll explain the rules of the competition. But we have got some municipal partners that are going to announce some problem statements for city services in areas of emergency response and workforce development and tourism and a number of different category areas. And the goal is to crowdsource some ideas, kind of hackathon style, for creating augmented reality solutions to these civic needs. And there will be after this kickoff meeting, there will be a meeting where people can make their proposals, and we're going to select about a half a dozen or so of those. We're going to give them some seed money to go and build out a proof of concept. And then by this summer, we're hoping to have a real demonstration of what these teams have built. And then we're going to award on the order of $35,000 or so and a slot in the Riot Accelerator program to try and build and scale something with the initial municipal partners as potential pilot customers to get a new business off the ground, and if all goes well, scale that nationwide. So we would love to have any entrepreneur that's interested come and join us and learn how to join a team.
Cool. I'll make sure this episode gets published this year. Otherwise I'll miss it. Just kidding. Well, so, like these things feed each other, right? So the latter was a good example of kind of just pulling together different entities that are public, private, providers, even if you call Facebook that, right? They've got tech. So like, I've got tech, I've got stuff, and we're going to try to get some entrepreneurs. We're going to, they weren't necessarily interested in just doing that themselves. They wanted to engage ecosystem partners like Riot. And then you also have the accelerator. I guess, do these each feed each other? It sounds like these feed each other. I guess tell me about kind of your, ecosystem building flywheel that you have going on.
Yeah, within Riot, our major activity areas are running this accelerator that we're expanding now to more and more cities around the United States. We underwrite that primarily through about 95 corporate sponsors that are the companies around the world that are either providing services like your firm Smashing Boxes does, or providing technology platforms like a Microsoft or a T-Mobile or a SaaS analytic platform, for example, that just about every business is built on some small number of cloud provider platforms, cellular networks, semiconductor devices, that those companies want to engage the entrepreneurial community. So there's an opportunity for entrepreneurs to participate for free, to get coaching, to get advice, to build their business stack out, to build their technical solution stack out, to potentially partner with these big companies that are motivated. If you have adopted, let's say, an Azure platform as an example in your device, well, it is in Microsoft's best interest for your company to grow and scale. So they can introduce you to customers, they can do other things, because if you grow, you become a valuable customer for them. We also then run this events platform where we run events and programs, workshops, conferences around the country. Well, that helps to get notoriety for the startup companies, and and puts them on stage so people know about their services, and that can drive sales. It also gives notoriety to the sponsors about how they're supporting the small business and entrepreneurial community. So it's kind of a win-win for them there. Then the final part of what we do is, under the brand, the Wireless Research Center, we operate a wireless testing facility, because everything is getting connected to the internet. Almost everything today that's a piece of hardware, at least, has an antenna in it. And we have engineers and folks that can help you to get those products designed, get the performance up to par to where they need to be, and then even do the regulatory certifications necessary to go to market.
That's great. Yeah, it sounds like, what Riot does is sort of analogous to this data economy that's coming, which is there has to be some infrastructure, there has to be some human coordination, but once you have those sort of tracks and pipes laid, then many magical things can happen. Do you want to highlight any of the best successes from the accelerator program, or I don't even know if that's grammatically correct, but do you want to, cast a spotlight on a couple of the better success stories?
We've had so many come through. I hate picking favorites, but I'll talk about one recently that just won a national award, because I think that might be interesting. We had a company come through our program called GreenStream Technologies. They were based out of Norfolk, Virginia, and had developed out essentially some stream level monitors that could deploy anywhere. They had solar cells on them and things, so you didn't necessarily need a power source. They had long range radios for data transmission, and they're able to run analytics based on stream levels to help understand when is an intersection in some community going to flood, well ahead of when it's actually going to flood, right? We want to take things and go from being reactive to becoming really predictive. And how do we get emergency responders in place before the flash flood happens, for example? How do you help a jurisdiction that's 3 counties downstream from where that huge rainfall just happened to know, 2 hours from now, you're going to have a problem? How do we manage our reservoirs in the right way that we don't have dam breaks and things? So there's an awful lot of really valuable things that can be done by understanding stormwater. And so we worked with GreenStream. We helped them to develop out some municipal relationships to kind of polish up their tech to get it all working right. And then, as a neutral convener, we thought, well, it'd be interesting to see if we could do some regional data sharing across the state of North Carolina. So we brought together a number of county governments, municipal governments, the emergency management department for the state of North Carolina and the state government, and a few corporate partners, including SaaS and Cisco and little companies like GreenStream. And we architected a framework for sharing all of that data openly back and forth between municipal groups, and plotting it on Esri maps and other things. And that project, in aggregate, not only is saving lives in a state that's regularly hit by hurricanes and others, but was just awarded by IDC the Smart Water Project of the Year for 2020. So it was a great success And if you're in municipal government in any way, I recommend reaching out to GreenStream Technologies.
That's a huge success. That's great. So congrats for your role in that, of course. Okay, cool. So I'm thinking about, smart cities. Is that a standard definition, or does that kind of mean many things to many people when you hear the term smart cities?
Yeah, it's a buzzword, and so people have different definitions. Probably, I think this smart adjective that we give everything will eventually go away. A little bit like I said, IoT will go away. Eventually, our watch is just gonna be our watch again. It won't be our smart watch. Our cities will be our cities again. Um, it's just a little bit of an aside. We're seeing more and more people use the word smart communities instead of smart cities, just to help realize it, no matter what size the location you live in, the same technology and principles can apply. So you don't have to be in the city, but I really think that anywhere you see that word smart, it's just saying that we're leveraging these connected device and data collection, data analytics technologies towards more and more real-time outcomes, more and more automated outcomes. So a smart city is a locality that is deploying these new technologies.
Yeah. Well, hold on. Let me check my smartphone real quick, which is
That's right.
differentiated from your phone. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I keep thinking about, I guess maybe also IoT for dummies is like dot 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 for dummies needs to go away, right? Because many people don't grasp many of the concepts that are out there. But when I'm thinking about how to drive more innovation and entrepreneurship, um, it seems like there's it's like it seems like there's this barrier of like if I either have to piggyback into an existing data set or I have to start to consider, am I deploying my own data? What are the bigger challenges? Well, and you gave the GreenStream one. I mean, that was a lot of people. I mean, that takes a village, So like, what are the biggest challenges, or how should kind of entrepreneurs and innovators be thinking about this if they're in the kind of the data, space in the cities space, aka not smart cities, but you know what I mean? Like how should they be thinking about this? And are there, it used to be there's too many barriers, too many hurdles, right? It's like, oh, you can't do IoT. You got to like manufacture hardware and do a deployment at that building. And then you've got one customer. Then you got to do that a bunch of times only to try to get some SaaS revenue. You might as well just build, something else, right? So how are you advising entrepreneurs to think about this, and where are they seeming to go more?
Yeah, I think it comes down to probably two things. One is don't try and do everything yourself. Find partners, go to those kind of creative communities or gathering places that I talked about to meet people to work together with, and then all of that partnership and networking together has to be framed around really, really strict focus on staying laser focused on what the customer need is, and by looking at that need, you will then understand what you need to build to solve that need, and then the things that you can do yourself, you do, and the ones that you can't, you reach out to these communities to find the right partners to do them. I will advise, kind of related to this, if there's anybody in the investment community that's listening in, the investment community, and I'm thinking mostly like VC style investors, have been a little bit spoiled for the last few decades in how easy it is um, to launch a SaaS company, a company that doesn't have any hardware or any real infrastructure cost at all. Essentially all you need to pay for an early stage company is a couple of laptops and some cloud computing, right? And the founders aren't even taking a salary yet, right? So the cost of investing in SaaS startups is relatively low, and going forward, because data is becoming a much more key component of any real-time solution, and guaranteeing access to that data could mean that you want to own the hardware that's got the sensors deployed in it, means that some of the startups in this data economy are going to be a little bit more expensive to get launched. But and so that's something that will be a change in mindset, I think, for the investment community. The defense to spending a little bit of extra money up front like that is that it is hard, to your point, Nick. It's extra work to have to deploy devices or design hardware and do these extra steps. But by the very nature of that being hard work, that's defense against competition. it's really easy for 15 copycat SaaS companies to launch as soon as somebody discovers an interesting market niche. But it's really hard for 15 other companies to also launch and also do hardware and everything else. And so, where you can, you might partner with a hardware provider and just do the software piece. I think the strongest companies are going to be the ones that do both. And the reason that I think the industry is moving that way is that the biggest of the big software companies are making such huge investments in hardware. They see the future coming and they're preparing for it.
Yep. Yeah. Are they doing it in a way that's like kind of infrastructure, or they want to own it? And can then a small startup compete with that if they're like, you know what I mean? I guess, is your competitive need then to still have the better experience, the better insights, even though you're gonna have duplicate sort of hardware infrastructure?
This is a trend that is, we're in the early throes of it, and it's very exciting, and there's lots going on. But this is a 20-year evolution. There's plenty of time to get involved. There's plenty of use cases that the big companies haven't even thought of yet. So I wouldn't discourage anybody from thinking there's not good opportunity with small companies. And then I think what will happen is, just like most major technology shifts, there will be thousands of fragmented solutions, and over time there'll be consolidations and acquisitions and so on. And so, particularly if you're thinking about starting a company and hope to get bought one day, this is a great time to start an IoT company.
Oh, well, bam, let's do it. Was that considered financial advice? I'm sorry. This disclaimer, not considered. So, but yeah, the biggest thing I heard is, if we can kind of have some business model innovation around how different thinking in a multi-layered way about how to make money off of the infrastructure, and that can justify the investment into it. And it's more like laying down broad. I mean, you want to make sure you can't just be easily leapfrogged, but it's kind of like the oil rig or the broadband, where it's like, if I build this, then I've got access to this asset for a certain amount of lifespan. And with that, I can, make this value in the marketplace. Without it, I can have nothing. And if I can proactively be thinking about ways to, monetize that by making that data available to other instances in a, non-competitive way or whatever, but still mine, I can turn their faucet off. Then now I've actually got more return I can layer on that, and I can justify even more investment. So I think, if we can, hopefully if the sort of capital stack can kind of line up with that, and there's a little bit of innovation in the, kind of approach to thinking about it. I mean, just like, I don't know if it just needs like the Elon Musk kind of thing, but actually it wasn't Elon Musk. It was another company before his solar one that was basically pivoted to kind of like, all they did was like think about financing, and they just like attached them to the home and made them a part of, the asset, not like you have to go finance this thing separately. And just by putting, notes that mirrored the home note on them, they were able to do more sales, because people were like, oh yeah, this adds to my cost, as opposed to it's a separate one-off. So I think kind of thinking far and wide, and ways to kind of monetize and recoup is going to be an important sort of element to this. And I've got, that's, okay, cool. That's great. What else? Before I have other thoughts, but before we hit time, have you done the awareness around Riot and around some of the upcoming stuff that you want to do, or do you have any more plugs that you feel are kind of important for this combo?
I don't need to plug anything else necessarily. We would love to get as many people engaged in our community as we can. Everything that we offer to startups, entrepreneurs, just people in the community is free, so we don't charge any money. Although we would love to hear from any other corporate partners that would love to become a sponsor. But you can find that information at riot.org. But I will just add briefly to what you said, because you're absolutely right, Nick, that by deploying that infrastructure, there will be new applications that we've never even thought about that will come to bear. For example, there's been a lot of discussion around how do we do remote healthcare monitoring. Well, one of the things that is interesting to the medical community is persistent monitoring, taking measurements all the time in a very similar and controlled way. Well, the driver's seat of the car is a great location where someone sits in exactly the same way at about the same time every day if they're commuting to work. They hold onto a steering wheel that could have sensors in it. Who would think that maybe an automobile would be a great surrogate for a doctor's office, but a place to take a daily measurement every morning and every evening on your way to and from work that could solve your healthcare? Well, whoever owns that car and decides, hey, there's an interesting application of these sensors that are in the vehicle, can unlock an entirely new kind of revenue that was never even thought of before. So the early adopters now that are deploying sensors in different ways for certain use cases, if they keep that open mind to use them for lots and lots of different kinds of use cases, they're extremely well positioned.
Yep. Yeah, that's a total whole nother convos around like how cars are like have somehow been rethought to make an amazing comeback. Like they are such a potential sort of quarterback for all these different things. Payments, was another convo. Like, I mean, I could actually just have a whole episode on just like car slices, but no, that's great. And I love what Riot's doing, and I can kind of obviously advocate and vouch for Riot in that it is so new and nascent that others have a hard time kind of finding what the opportunity is. And if we can start, and they need lots of collisions of needs, providers, people just being willing to be like, I mean, even if it's a corporate sponsor being like, I've got hardware, just who wants this? Like, because they don't know what to do with it. They're trying to make more sales. Entrepreneurs saying, I think I have this business need, but yeah, getting kind of the municipalities involved. I think you've done a great job of building the ecosystem. And I think, you're right. I think, we are in the early stages of this. And I do like, I mean, I don't even know if a year or 2 years ago, I really had as clear of a thought around, this infrastructure is stuff that you could sell, resell, lease, release out, as opposed to we're building a bunch of use cases that get installed at a thing. Like I install stuff, sensors in a factory, and it tells you when your machine needs maintenance. Well, like there could be other data there that is not competitive to your business, that if you have 10,000 customers, you could be selling them, I don't know, geothermal kind of data feedback that people can license. And now that could just, maybe we could see an Excel, I think, with more thoughts around that, which if I'm thinking it, 20 other people or 20,000, 20 million have already thought about that. But hopefully through that kind of thinking, we can see an acceleration in kind of the innovation, like infrastructure layer.
Absolutely. And I'll encourage too, we've had multi-billion-dollar, international companies put teams through our startup accelerator just to do that, to ideate on, we have all these skills and assets, like how should we be using them in ways that we haven't thought of yet? How do we create that new business unit or that new revenue stream that we haven't thought of before? We love those kind of projects. So, anyone that wants, reach out, we'll take a conversation. We'll introduce you to some folks to have those kind of idea sessions. But yeah, it's a great time right now to be innovating, just because all these technologies are so low cost.
That's great. Well, I'm going to reach back out. I hope others do too. I think I have like 3. I think I have a remote sensing opportunity. I'm interested in like a HighRise building infrastructure, IoT infrastructure as a service. I think that's it's an asset class that people just don't know what to do with. It's space. It can be useful. It's already constructed. So what's the future of that? And then kind of the combination of like smart grid, smart city, blockchain, is sort of a whole other sort of separate kind of thought bubble that I'm sort of thinking in. But those are 3 that I think would be fun to explore with you guys. And, I look forward to kind of keeping that conversation going. Well, thanks, Tom, for joining. This is awesome. I mean, I miss the days of like, we can also do this in person or hit some golf balls or whatever, but this was great. This has been a fun hour, and I appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Nick. I can't wait. Vaccines are on the way. So hopefully a few more months we'll get back out on the links together.
That's right. All right. Thanks, Tom.